start?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm starting.
I'll do an introduction. So we're so glad to have Rabbi Dr. Zvi Leshem here. I'm so glad to know him through my in-laws from Indianapolis, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure really to have him. Had him last year for Hashkata, right?
Yeah.
And this year we were able to enjoy a shiur by him tonight. He's a leader and scholar in the Piaseczner Rebbe, on the Torah teachings of the Piaseczner Rebbe, amongst other amazing things, and really big schools to have you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Avi, for arranging this, for inviting me. I should probably thank my wife, Julie, who gave me a really lot of insights into this piece. And there's a lot of the Torah that I'll give over to you were based on an idea that she told me a long time ago. And also that she convinced me after we learned this a lot, this sort of stuff, and we're very connected to Piaseczner, that I should start doing somersaults at weddings. Yeah. So I do try to do a somersault before the chassan call at every wedding. Although I'm getting a little old, sometimes really my head really hurts afterwards. I'm not sure it's a great idea, but I still try to do it. There's shiurs dedicated to all the hostages should be home before the shiur's over, before it even starts. Amen. And all the other blessings that we need. Okay, so this is, I don't know how much background to do on the Piaseczner himself, but maybe even before that, I'll do a little bit, but even before that, what we're going to see here is an extraordinary document, extraordinary piece of Torah from the Rebbe's diary, וזרוז, which was his personal spiritual diary, which was published in English. I don't think it's such a great translation, a long time ago, called To Heal the Soul. And it's one of the books that the manuscript was, he gave over to be buried, together with the manuscript that became known as HaKodesh and the manuscripts of Heichal and Mavo Sharim, that they were buried and discovered after the war. When he wrote it, it's not clear to me, just personally as I go through it, it's not clear to me that he necessarily, when he was first writing it, intended that it be published. But it was obviously clear that as he knew that he would probably be killed, and he was giving his Torah for posterity, because it would be important for us to be learning it. So he did decide, obviously, that we should learn this also, because he included this book with the other manuscripts that he gave over to be buried. This topic, we're basically going to talk about somersaults, okay, which he did. It sounds silly. Somersaults have a long history in Chassidut from early on. The most detailed article about it appeared in both English and Hebrew categories by David Asaf, who's from the Tel Aviv University. He puts it in a context of other things that we could call Hasidic fooling around, like pushing and shoving each other, throwing stuff at each other. I don't know if you know, in some Hasidim, like when they light the Chanukiah, everyone throws stuff at the person lighting the Chanukiah. There are people at the end of Shabbos would push and shove each other, and there's lots of stuff. Or he brings up a guy who had in the Maggid's base medrash who had a daughter, and everyone hit him, and whatever. All this. So he puts the somersaults together with that, and in his main view, they serve two purposes. One is to help achieve simcha. Right? We all need to do silly things, as Rabbeinu taught us over and over again. Sometimes you have to do really silly stuff in order to stay in simcha at all costs. And the other thing that he says about it is it's basically to achieve humility. That by doing a kind of silly, childish act, so then that'll hopefully help me, work on my ego, because I'm acting like a jerk. So,
Sort of like approach?
Maybe. Maybe very vaguely, but yeah. Okay? But what we're going to see here is a totally different reality. All those things might be here as well, but we're going to see here, basically, if you excuse my bombastic language, what I would call mystical, magical, prophetic, messianic somersaults. In other words, the aspirations that the Rebbe expressed. Has anyone learned this before? Okay. The aspirations that the Rebbe is going to express here are way, way beyond just I want to be happy or I want to work on my ego, which issues that he talks about in other places, especially ego. But this is a totally different reality. The closest thing that I've seen to it in more modern times is Rabbi Yochanan Twersky, the Piaseczner Rebbe in Bayit Vagan, who was nifter about 25 years ago or so. He used to sometimes, when people would come to him with like a difficult kfittel, he would, himself or with one chassid or a grandson, he would go in the other room and they would do somersaults. The idea being to flip the mazel. Okay?
Why would he put this with those other pushing and throwing?
Why did
he put?
No, he mentions this, but he doesn't. He mentions this just. No, he talks about somersaults in Chassidut earlier. Like for example,
okay,
Avram of Kalisk, right, was known for doing somersaults. And the Tanya thought it was really not a good idea. And the Magid, they gave the misnagim ammunition against the Chassidim. Instead of learning Torah, they're doing somersaults. So even the Magid.
The Bamshas do at the end of every
right, and it goes back. There's a long history of it, but so David Asaf brought this just to say, look, here even in the 20th century we have references, but he didn't really go into it very much. The truth is in his, I forget, originally wrote in Hebrew and it came out in English the other way around. So he references my article about this at some point. So he's aware of these issues. Okay, so does everyone know who the Piaseczner Rebbe was? Is it worth 2 minutes?
It's worth 2 minutes.
He was born in 1889. In 1889 in Gurgis to his father, Rabbi Melech of Gurgis, was a very, very old Rebbe. He was born when his father was like 70. His younger brother was the Admiral Chalutz, whose collected writings just were published by Rav Micha Klein, a huge, massive book of all the articles of the Admiral Chalutz, the pioneering Rebbe. He was the Piaseczner's younger brother. It's really interesting stuff there. And he was a descendant of Rabbi Elimelech and the Choza and the Kabalistic Somersaults and the Mor Veshemesh, who were very influential on him, as was the Tanya and as was the Beis Aaron of Karlin. And when his father died when he was a little kid. He was raised largely by his nephew, Rabbi Rachman Moshe of Kuznets, who then became his father-in-law. Okay, we'll get into the age gap questions now. And when he died, so the Rebbe became a Rebbe in Piaseczner, which is a suburb of Warsaw. It's very close now. It's attached to Warsaw. If you're there, you can go there. There's interesting things to see there, a little bit, not so much. And there's also, and then he became the official city of the Rav, official Rav of the city. I'm still a little jet-lagged. And after World War I, he moved to Warsaw for most of the year, although he would still spend several months of the year in Piaseczner. And he set up a big yeshiva, Das Moshe, in 1923, which had 300 students by the time the Shoah started, which I know we're used to Lakewood and the Mir, but there's nothing like that existed in those days. 300 students was very, very big yeshiva. And he wrote a lot of amazing svarim in chinuch and hadracha and guiding people in second person, like I'm writing to you, the reader. I'm telling you what you should, maybe do or think about doing. And he's of course best known for his drashot HaKodesh that he gave during the Warsaw Ghetto for the first 3 years of the ghetto. The proper name is more like the scientific edition of the book Drashot Mishnot Haza'am, drashot from the bad years. If you're going to buy that book, it's worth buying the critical edition. The regular edition is filled with mistakes, not to the detriment of the editors that were working from a very, very, very difficult to read manuscript that they didn't even have the original. They had a very poor photocopy of a very difficult manuscript, so they made tons of mistakes, which is okay. They did the best they could, but we now have the correct text. If you really want to know what the Rebbe said, so then it's worth spending a few more shekels and getting the good one. Okay, etc. So basically what we're going to see here, and then we'll start reading, is a diary entry, a text written, in first person about himself, which is divided into two parts, okay? It's a part about thinking about, should I do somersaults? And then there's an ellipse, which works out very nicely, and we turn the page. And then there's his reflection on thinking about the somersaults that he did. Okay, there's no description of the actual moment that he somersaulted or cartwheeled or flipped or whatever exactly he did. So we don't know exactly what happened at that moment, and we don't know why he didn't talk about it. I have a theory that I'll share with you, which you might think is totally crazy, but that's okay, of why he doesn't say anything about what happened at that moment. I think it's related to his goals that he reveals about what he was trying to achieve in these somersaults. To put it in a bigger context of what's going on, he's a very, very, very big proponent of what we call today avodah begashmiut, service to corporality. He views it as the Baal Shem Tov's major chidush, and he, after 200 years of it being largely suppressed by most rabbis or limited only to tzaddikim, he puts it out there as the major avodah for everyone, which means, for our purposes, that acts that are not technically defined as mitzvot by halacha can be extremely significant, and something that's seemingly as insignificant as doing a somersault can turn out to be an incredibly significant spiritual act for him, as we shall see momentarily. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you know approximately what year this was?
I don't know what year it was written. Most of his diary entries are not dated. The English translation, which was done by Yoshua Starrett, he writes in his introduction that he thinks it was done on Shavuot, and I think he said 1929 or something, but I don't know, have any idea where he got that date from, and I know and nothing to me here indicates that it was on Shavuot. It seems very, very clear to me that it was done at a Hachnasa Sefer Torah. That's the whole situation he's describing here. So no, we don't know what date. This is from the book. The entries from this book were basically 1920s and 1930s. So sometime in that very long period. Okay, so I'll just say one other thing that Professor Chavila Padaya from Ben Gurion wrote an article a very long time ago about typographies of early Rebbes, and she talked about the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, and she described their basic style in avodas, that the Baal Shem Tov was what she called an extroverted mystic, and the Maggid was an introverted mystic. And so, for example, if the Baal Shem Tov is shaking so much when he's davening that the Maggid is freaking out, like, I can't be in the same room as him, I need quiet, even though she's also admits that there's no pure types and everyone is a little bit of both. There's the Piaseczner has both of those aspects to him. In this piece, is clearly expressing his extroverted style aspect of his avoda. Okay, so let's see. It's like, as I said, page 1 is his thinking about, should I do somersaults? And page 2 is going to be, okay, let's think about the somersaults that I did and what happened and what didn't happen. Because just to give you a spoiler, he doesn't feel that he achieved all his goals. But as he's describing the goals, the spiritual goals that he didn't achieve, so we find out a lot of really interesting things about what he was trying to do by these somersaults. Okay, so let us begin. So this is chapter 27. Im bria yivra ha'ish Yisrael mikirbo, kedusha asher ba et HaKodesh Yisrael yikadesh, az kol asiotav, af asher yibademi libo lasot l'shem Hashem l'sha'a zo, l'guf kedusha yithavu, gam gufo migufam yartiach, yitoses, gam yitkadesh. Says, if a Jewish person will invent something from inside of them, some kind of holiness for Hashem, the Kadosh Yisrael, that he's doing something to do an act of holiness towards Hashem, then everything that he does, kol asiyatav, even that which he just invented from his heart, he just made it up to do it l'shem Hashem at that moment, becomes a guf kedusha. Like kedushas haguf, not just kedushas mammon or whatever. It has kedushas haguf, this act. Okay, so he says Jewish people here also. So this would be a din in the gavra. Okay, gam gufo mi gufam yartiach yit oses v'gam yit kadesh. Then his body will begin to boil and bubble and become holy. So what he's basically saying here is his introduction, which at the very end of the piece he kind of says it again, but in the middle of the piece he'll tell us a lot more about how this works. What he's saying is that basically any Jewish person who makes up an idea to do something for Hashem, even though it's not a mitzvah or a minhag or anything, it's just something he thought of, has holiness. it's not just stam, it does really take effect as becoming a holy act of avodat Hashem. Okay, and we'll see. That's his introduction of why am I doing a somersault? Because that's going to be this act that I, as we'll see, want to do in this context, and it's going to be transformed to a holy act. Okay, so now he starts to talk about it. Ki lama zeh kol kach nitpa'alti b'shah shehachlatati lasot et hahithapchut casual shik b'shat chinuch sefer haTorah. Why was it that I was so nitpa'alti, I was so emotionally affected, right? Pa'al, nitpa'el, right? I was affected myself. And he has a number of verbs that he uses throughout all his writings for different levels of emotional, spiritual impact. Like he talks about hitragshut and hitlavut and hitpa'alut, and right. The main one being hitragshut and hitlavut. Hitragshut is becoming emotional. Hitlavut is, we translate as spiritual or religious ecstasy. The difference being that when you reach a stage of hitlavut, you no longer remember where you are or who you are. You're just completely caught up 100% in the state of dvekut. And don't remember, like if you're dancing Friday night in shul, and it's really gavaldic, so that's like hitragshut, and then you say, wonder what we're having for dinner. Like, so then you're clearly not in hitlavut. You're still in hitragshut. But if you forget about that, then you might be. So lama kolkach nitpa'alti b'sha'a shichlati lasot hapchut, when I decided to do a somersault. I mean, we don't know exactly what it is, if it's a cartwheel or a somersault or whatever, but some acrobatic stunt like that. B'shat chinuch sefer haTorah, at the time of, I think this is pretty clearly means, the dedication of the Sefer Torah, like what we call the Hachnasas Sefer Torah. V'lama zeh rachafu kol kach atzmotai kishera'iti me'az et hamakom asher bo erkod v'edapech v'kol gufi nizda'azeh. Why is it that all of my bones, my whole essence is all trembling when I, even now, in retrospect, whenever I pass by the place where I danced and somersaulted, and my whole body goes into like shocks, like spasms, just even now. And later on I walk into wherever that was, and I have this tremendous impact. Right? So now he's going to start to explain the background of like how he goes through the thought process of making this decision that this is what he's going to do. And he says there's some pretty radical things here. This is a really good piece to see a lot about him and the radical nature of some of his types of avoda, and the extent to which there's really intense, deep, radical Jewish mystics and Kabbalists way into the 20th century. There's the people who tell you that this was like what it was like in the late 18th century, and then it died, right? Okay, no, it didn't die. Some of it went underground. Some of it was less, whatever you want to say. But here you have an example of something that's going on in the 1920s, 1930s. He says, "Harbe pamim chukad ha'ish Yisrael mitlakachat bo harbe yoter mimatzavo mitorato mi'avodato." A lot of times a person's desire starts burning in them, is set on fire in them, much more than their normal spiritual level of their Torah and their avoda. V'omer, and he says to himself, Mi tein li eza asiyah gedola v'charifa v'sena l'shem Hashem. Who can give me some great and powerful act to do l'shem Hashem, right? Asiyah gedola v'charifa, literally like a sharp, or a, strong act that I could do for Hashem. Libo nofel b'kirbo. And then he feels bad. Now this is now a very radical passage in my opinion. Libo nofel b'kirbo. He feels bad, his heart sinks, and he says, Ma torati uma kol avodati. What is really my Torah? Is it really so worthwhile? What about my avoda? Is it really so worthwhile? In others, there's a person who's a Rebbe, a tzaddik, who enters Rosh Yeshiva, and he spends 24 hours a day doing mitzvahs and learning Torah and davening with dvekut and helping people doing chesed. And he says, that's okay. It's pretty good, but it's not enough. I need to do something more special, something unique, right? It says, Gam nafshi lo tisba mehen, my soul is not satisfied from all the mitzvot and all the Torah that I do. In other words, he's basically letting us ready to know that this act that you just make up yourself can be in some way a more powerful spiritual act of Avodat Hashem than a mitzvah or than learning Torah, which is taking Avodat V'Kashmiyut in a way to its extreme. Not that it's as good, not that it's worth something, not that it's as good as a mitzvah, but this can become even more powerful than a mitzvah itself. וגם בשעה שאין תשוקתו מתלקחת למסור נפשו בפועל, even at a time when his desires are not so powerful to actually want to dial Kiddush Hashem, nonetheless, לעשייה חריפה מעין מסירת נפש משתוקק, his desires to do a powerful act that's like מסirut nefesh. מי ייתן עתה בידי עשייה, who can give me an idea of what to do? Shall kol panim, l'sha akor et libi mi libi, gufi mi gufi, atzami mi atzami, or atzamai mi atzamai, helach laHashem. He says, who can give me this powerful Mesiras Nefesh type of act, which will, at least temporarily, meaning I won't actually die. I will live to tell the tale, but temporarily, my heart will come out of my heart. My body will be removed from my body. My either bones or my essence will come out as well, and I will go straight to Hashem. So, first of all, the topic of Mesiras Nefesh is important for him. He is, as I said, one of his great grandfathers is the Noam Elimelech, who has two kind of visualization meditations in Setel Katan, in the introductory part of Noam Elimelech, where he talks about throwing yourself into a fire. Right? We'll see a more clear allusion to that later on in order to have kavanah and kriya shema. So imagine that you're standing in the goyim, wanted you to, Hashem converted you, instead you throw yourself into the fire. All that. So first of all, those very short kind of meditations of visualizations in the Noam Elimelech had a lot of impact on him as he made guided imagery a major component of his system in Avodat Hashem. This we talked about last year in the shiur about Hashkatah. There's a few types of meditations, but the main thing that he does is visualizations or guided imagery, and he gets that initially from the Noam Elimelech, from these kind of things. So that's one thing. Mesiras Nefesh is also a big topic he talks about in many places. Obviously in HaKodesh that becomes, in a sense, the topic of the book, amongst suffering and things like that. I sometimes think that maybe if he was doing things again, he wouldn't necessarily stress some of those themes so much in his earlier books. I don't know if he thought they would really become so real in a way that was so difficult for all of Am Yisrael just a few years later. But basically what he's describing here is the desire to leave his body and have a complete, total bitul of his own personality and become completely, ultimately, have such a state of dvekut and what we call, excuse my academic language, ichud misti, or mystical union, with Hashem. Some of the scholars of the Piaseczner try to make him sound like a modern philosopher and downplay the mystical side of him, or certainly things like that. So he's not really interested in mystical union with God, and there's just so much evidence to the contrary throughout all of his writings. If you look in the introduction to B'nai Machshavato, which is basically the first thing that he wrote, pretty much, there as well you have very strong language, sort of similar to this, about going into straight to Hashem and being absorbed by Hashem. We'll see more of that, more detail later on. But he's still thinking about, I want to do something really, really powerful that's going to lead me to this state of complete and total dvekut, where my personality will be essentially effaced and I'll merge with Hashem temporarily, I will not die, but briefly. So what am I going to do? Okay, how am I going to do that?
What is Mesiras Nefesh here? Is it because it's in public is it public embarrassment, or?
I'll talk about that. So yeah, that is, as you'll see very soon, that is part of it. But he will talk about that. So we'll go on. So he says, Keshi Tchalti Lachin Atzmi Lahasiyum V'Achinuch. As I start to prepare myself for the siyum, I assume he means the siyum of writing the Sefer Torah, V'Achinuch, then the dedication of the Torah. Nitkatcha li bi chukati beyeter se'et, v'ti'i ke'esh ba'atzamai. Then my desires burned in me even more powerfully, and it was like a fire within me. Halosha smecha, kedusha v'nora'a me'ein zeh, efshar achat hi b'chol chayai. This moment of great simcha and kedusha and awesomeness maybe only comes once in a lifetime. Now, I don't know why that is. All of us have been to lots of, Hachnasa Sefer Torah, and it's, whatever. It's always a lot of fun, and it's special, and it's, holy, and whatever. But, this is really dramatic. So I don't know what the, anything about the background of this particular incident.
Was it as common?
Right.
Probably not.
Probably not. We have a lot more money to spend on writing Sefer Torah, and other Hebrew mitzvahs and whatnot. But yeah, maybe. But maybe it was something like the first Sefer Torah being brought into his shul or his yeshiva or something like that. But I don't know. I really don't know. He says, "Umau chalasot ba begufi befol Elokai." What can I do, like mamash do it befol, with my body for Hashem? Now, he's very, as a Hasidic thinker, he's very into what I call holistic avodat Hashem. All the time, he talks about using your intellect, your emotions, and your body, right? That come all over. Then goof, goof, neshama, and seichel. He talks about it over and over again. Goof, regesh, and seichel. They're just throughout all of his writings. Very, very much. He wants all these things, but we see he puts a lot of importance on the body throughout all of his writings. He talks a lot about physical things in his books. Right? So here he wants to do something with his body. He doesn't want to just daven with his mouth or meditate with his head, which he does in other places. He wants to do something physical. Okay, so what are the options? Agil barad daver kod b'kol kochi. Well, I could dance with trembling and shake, with all of my might. So, that's okay. Aval nafshi od lo tisaba. That won't give my soul what it really desires. It's not enough. Ein zot od asiyah gedola harifa hamatima l'sha kedosha mromama v'yichida kazod. It's still not this powerful, intense, harif action which is appropriate for such a holy, exalted, unique moment like this. Right? I mean, I'll see them dance a lot. He talks about V'nei Machshava Tova. He talks about what should you do at the meeting. So he talks about you should sing, and you should, if the spirit moves you, dance. And he, of course, talks about drinking alcohol. He's a big proponent of moderate drinking of alcohol for 3 reasons. Because it helps people feel more together. It helps also the nefesh habahami enter into the avoda, and he also sees it as a consciousness, consciousness altering drug, which can lead one to be more open to receiving Ruach HaKodesh, which is another big one of his projects, is reinstituting Ruach HaKodesh in Nevuah, right? So he says in the Machshava Tova, so then he goes, so long as you don't spend all your time singing, drinking, and dancing at the B'nai Machshava Tova meetings, you're supposed to be mostly learning and doing avoda, but that shouldn't be all the whole story. But okay, he says, V'omer, so I said to myself, Et hapech ke'otam hanivzim ashfelim hamitbatlim b'simchat adonaihem lichvodam. I got it. I will do somersaults like those lowly, despicable batlanim. Again, the word bitul is probably not, there's more, yep. Bitul is in here, that do it for the simcha of their masters and to honor them. So basically he's talking about like court jesters. Okay, like the king is, to please the king. So the court jesters, they jump around and do acrobatics and, flip around and make them, and do, foolish looking stuff to make the king laugh. So I could do something like that. I could be like the court jester for Hashem and do bizarre acrobatics to show how much I'm willing to totally be mevatel myself to Hashem. Okay? V'gabi satan leap notbi. But then the Satan, aka my Yetzer Hara, started to pipe in here to try to bother me, to get me not to do this plan. And he said, Ma avodah zot lecha, right? Which I think are play on the words from the Haggadah Shal Pesach. Ma avodah zot lechem. It's interesting. The Kashnitzer Maggid, who's another one of his great grandfathers, who he's very influenced by, and Piaseczner more than anything else is a branch of Kashnitz. It's also not so far from Warsaw. After Gur, then you get to Kashnitz. So he says in his parish on the Haggadah, or the parish on the Chumash, but he throws it on Pesach. So he says the Ben HaRasha, when he says Ma'avodah Zot Lechem, what he's saying is, are you Hasidim? You're eating and drinking? You think that's avodah? Right? And the answer is, yeah, that's avodah. It's called avodah begashmiut, or in more traditional language, bechol dracha da'eu. Yeah, we do think that's avodah. So it may be that he's even thinking of that piece from the Kashnitzer Maggid here. Ma avodah zot lecha, says the Satan, says his Yetzer Hara. What, you're going to do a somersault like you think that's avodah? What's the matter with you? What craziness is this? Ma tam yesh bezeh, what's the reason for it? Ma ichpat le l'kadosh baruch hu im titapech o lo. You think Hashem cares if you do a somersault or not? So I'll play words in the Gemara of Ma ichpat l'Hashem im shochatim mi'atzavaru mi'oref. Right, so Hashem cares if you do a somersault? This is your big chiddush you came up with of how to serve Hashem. You're going to do a somersault? I mean, like, come on, you're a Rosh Hashiva, you're a tzaddik, you're a descendant of all these great rabbis, and this is how you're going to behave? That's what you think is your big avoda? And in fact, you may also bump your head or do something else that's not healthy, So, this is a really bad idea, Rebbe. Let's, maybe you should just stick with dancing like you thought of originally. Like, that's okay. Dance around excitedly, but don't do a somersault. And now coming to what Rabbi Yehuda said, V'im lo tira'eh bezeh l'shota u'mishuga b'nei kol. Won't you look like an idiot and an insane person in front of everyone? Now this, by the way, in B'nai Moshe Latova, he has a passage where he talks about the fact that everyone has inside of them what he calls koach hamivaker, this aspect of the Yetzer Hara which is constantly criticizing you. That no matter what you do, it's like telling you it's not good enough. It's constantly putting you down. Oh, you think that was a good davening? No, you didn't have kavanah the whole time. Or, oh, you did this mitzvah? Yeah, I know you had an ulterior motive. Or whatever it is, all the time, constantly, like a cheshbon HaNefesh, but in a really negative way. At the end of Chashon Avreichim, he has a whole chapter on how to, do cheshbon HaNefesh. But there is, so that's what this sounds like. You'll look like a shote, you look like a fool. So this is what you said about, he's a chashuv person, he's a Rosh Hashiva, he's a tzaddik, how's this going to go over? Now obviously, this was not common. Apparently from here we can see, if all the tzaddikim in Warsaw were doing somersaults, so then apparently it wouldn't be a big deal. But apparently all of a sudden they were not. And he wasn't apparently. So it would look really weird. Now I think the word meshugah here is really important because there's a radak, I forget in Sefer Shoftim, I think, that talks about Nevi'im, that when they get Nevuah, they look like a Mishugah. And he describes it basically as though they look like they're having like an epileptic fit, and people see them when the Navi is in a trance, and then they look like a Mishugah. So I think that the word Mishugah here may be related to what we're going to see later, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that there is a Ruach HaKodesh prophetic aspiration here as well, which he hasn't revealed yet. So the word Mishugah could be related to that, in addition to being obviously just in the pshat, like clearly what he's saying, you'll look like an idiot. Okay? This, by the way, is very reminiscent of whose criticism of who? Exactly. So we're going to see.
He has a makor.
Yes. He has a makor. We're going to see soon. He's going to start talking about David Melch, but obviously he's relating here also to the criticism of Heichal, again, Bat Shaul against David when he danced with Aaron Kodesh.
Do you find this concept by simple space of shoeva, at least?
Yeah.
Not everybody could do that.
Nachon, he doesn't mention that here, but yeah, we have the simple space shoeva, the dafka, the chachamim, the Rambam described in Hilchos Lulav, dafka, the chachamim are the ones that are doing all this stuff and everyone watches. Yeah. Okay. So his Yetzer Hara right now has got him he's pinned him down a little bit. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to look like an idiot, and it's stupid anyways. Hashem doesn't care. Just be normal. Stop trying to be weird, whatever. And then, Az minahemet libi shagati, my heart then roared back. Yigar Hashem b'cha hasatan, a pasuk from Zechariah. Hashem should rebuke you, Satan. Lo et lachshov cheshbonot. This is not the time to do cheshbon nefesh. Hasha gedolah. This is a great moment. Yechidah v'dechuka, and it's a unique moment, and it's a pressing moment. Whatever is happening is happening. If I don't do it now, I might not have a chance. Like sometimes when I'm at the wedding, I'm like, should I do a somersault or not? And I'm like, well, if you don't do it now, what always happens is you don't do it right now, they're going to take the kala back to the other side of the mechitza, and you missed your chance. So do it now. Right? It's right now. It has to be done. Lasot ata asiyah mi'ein mesirut nefesh, to do an act which is similar to mesirut nefesh. L'shem tzuri v'koni, ani rotzeh, to do something like mesirut nefesh for my creator, right? So mesirut nefesh also in the sense of total bitul, like of doing something. Certainly my ego will not be, be its normal, thing here. I'm not going to act kavadik at all, right? The kevan sheba beriyuti tifachadeni, since you, the Yetzer Hara, are trying to scare me about my health concerns, ubebizyoni tisapkeni, and you're getting me to be worried about my bizayon, about looking like an idiot. Since my Yetzer Hara is telling me that, all that stuff, so then I know that that's exactly what I need to do. You need to do as it says. I don't remember if he says it right. I think it's Brother Nesivas Shalom. I don't remember by name of who. That whatever the Yetzer Hara tells you to do, you say, I'll do exactly the opposite. Whatever you tell me, I do the opposite. Right? So since you told me not to do this, and you have all these reasons that you told me why I shouldn't do it, clearly this is a big deal that you're trying to get me to not do this. I'm going to do it. Matzati efo et ha'asiyah harifa asher chipasti u'miata ani machlitu mitkadesh la. Therefore, I found the powerful, intense act that I've been searching for, and right now I've decided, and this has become holy to me, and he did it. Apparently he did it. But he's not going to tell us anything about the moment of doing it. We turn the page, we're going to see him reflecting on, after the fact, what did or didn't happen when he did it. And at the end, we'll talk about why he doesn't tell us about it. Okay? So we don't have a description. Like he doesn't say, I did 3 headstands and then a double flip and then I jumped backwards on my hands and then I walked across the balancing beam and then I did a double flip off and landed on my feet and that was it. He doesn't tell us exactly what happened.
Is there, this is somersaults, I guess he had the physical ability or whatever, at least in his mind, that he felt he could do it, but is there like a fine line between like Yetzer Hara and common sense, certain things, like?
Yeah, probably. Look, again, we don't know when he did this, so it could have been, if it was in 1920, so then he was, 31. If it was in 1938, so then he was, in his, early 50, around 50. So it's a difference, I remember 50 and I remember 30. They're very different, So, but yeah. Okay, so now we reach the stage where he starts to think about and analyze and reflect on the somersaults that he did without telling us the details of them. And we'll see. And what he'll reveal to us a lot of interesting things here. He says, Min az, since then, asiyah hedyotit zo asher milibi biditi nikadshali. Since then, this asiyah hedyotit, this parv act, this non-mitzvah act, this act that I just made up, that I made up myself from my own heart, has become holy to me. Nit yakra befanai, it's yakar, it's special for me. Nit batalti lefana, I mevato myself to this act of somersaulting, as I view this still as one of the great spiritual acts of my life. V'kasher machshavat gufi rak hitchila litrachesh v'lachshov et pulata pshuta maseh hitkut asher lefanai, tekef kadmua nishmati machshava ke'en mesirut nefesh bi hiv'ira. Just when I began, it's interesting this phrase is machshevet gufi, the thought of my body. So here you have the kind of mixing together, the feelings and the physical are sort of mixed together. Okay, when that began to come up in my mind, and I started to think about doing this simple act of flipping or somersaulting. Tekev kadmua nishmati machshava ke'en mesirut nefesh. Again, I felt like I was engaged in some act that was connected to mesirut nefesh, and it was burning within me. Lo hitaphut pshuta ra'iti kvar b'dimyoni. I didn't now in my dimyon, in my imagination. Dimyon is one of his major themes throughout all of his books, is developing one's imagination properly, one's dimyon, right, through meditation, through dimyon mudra, what we call dimyon mudrach. So there's some people they call dimyon novea, right? I didn't see that in my mind. And here you see clearly the allusion to Rabbi Elimelech in the Seitel Katan. Rak me'ein ke'ein mizbeach haya mavhik le'enai. It was like a burning mizbeach of fire in front of me, in my mind. Hamakom asher bo b'shat chinuch sefer Torah na'avor, in the place where we would be walking through in the procession of the Sefer Torah. Hakol nitkadesh, v'kol eish bo'era titlakeach. Everything became holy. Everything became like a vision of a giant fire. Udamai toses v'nai zolgot dimaot. My whole blood was boiling and my eyes were pouring down tears. Tears were floating down my eyes. Okay? So this is still he's describing now, like, again, a little bit like right before it happens. Okay. But here you see, I think, very clearly the allusion to the idea of Rabbi Elimelech, that in others, I think what he's saying is I imagine myself somersaulting into this fire. By the way, this is really tough for the next year's shiur, maybe Bli Neder, but the place in Bnei Machshava Tova where he talks about visualizing Hashem based on the Ravid and Hilchos Tshuva, which is a very, very radical piece. And then just recently, my good friend Rav Shalom Matan Shalom, who's a really, really fine young Piaseczner scholar, published an article in Heichal on that piece. I have an article on it also, but he, I think, has access to more information and went beyond me. There's this whole thing that the Piaseczner says, if you can't have kavanah and davening, so you can rely on the Ravid, his unusual interpretation of the Ravid, although there's something actually in Rav Soloveitchik in the halachic mind, which is somewhat similar, that you could imagine Hashem, right? You could imagine that you're standing before the Kisei HaKavod, and then eventually you'll get beyond, you won't need to do that anymore. But you can have an imagination of something visual. So in one of the manuscripts, we don't have, unfortunately, the original Bnei Machshava Tova. It's presumably in someone's boidum in Haifa or something like that. You know what a boidum is? In Israel, there's something like a drop ceiling, and there's a storage room under the ceiling. Mm-hmm. It's like the place where everyone puts the stuff and they forget it's there, and then 50 years later, they leave the apartment and people start pulling out all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So apparently the original manuscript is in someone's boidum like that, and they won't give it up. But in some of the earlier, better texts of Bnei Machshava Tova, he says that on the Kisei HaKavod, when you're imagining this, that there's a big flame on it, and the editors of Bnei Machshava Tova, this is his nephew Rabbi Elimelech and the others who did, they took that out. They thought it was too radical, and they were getting flack apparently from the Kloisenberger Rebbe about this, and they edited that piece out. But a friend of mine, Shalom Matan Shalom, is working on a critical edition of Bnei Machshava Tova, which will be very, very important.
Is the issue that you put in physicality?
Yes, yeah, that's a big issue. That's huge. But that's not our topic, so sorry for that aside. Let's go on. umi. Okay, so now he's going to explain how does this work. Like, how does it work that making up some act yourself, like somersaulting, how does it work that that becomes an act of kedusha? How does that work? Like, what gives it that status? Okay, he says, "Mi ubemen nitkadsha l'sha asiyah zo asher b'libi biditi." What is it? How is it that for that moment, this act that I just made up became a holy act? V'lama zeh gam gufi mimena kol kach pirkes uba nitkadesh. Why is that even my whole body was trembling and became holy from this act? So now he's going to tell us the answer. Im lo yedei nitzotzot tovim asher mikfar bi nitkabtzu vata nivreu asher gama pachod misrael zoche lahem. This is what I think he means here. He says it must be that it's through the good sparks, nitzotzot of kedusha, that were already gathered within me, nitkabtzu, were gathered together within me, and as I had within my body sparks of kedusha, vata nivro, but now they were created. So I don't think he means created. It's the wrong order. Usually you create something and then you gather. I think he means now they were actualized, that they were in me and within in potential, and by doing this act really l'shem shamayim, with total kavanah for Hashem, that activated the nitzotzot, and now they're no longer were dormant within me, but they became actualized, and that's what gave kedusha content into the act that I did. This is key. Every Jewish person has them. Asher gama pachot Yisrael, even the simplest Jew has sparks of kedusha with them all the time, but they're usually dormant. They haven't been actualized. In order to actualize, you need to do something powerful or intense, and then they all of a sudden they light up. So then when they all light up, so then the act that I did of somersaulting is no longer just like, I went to the gym and I worked out, but now the working out is now an act of kedusha because it's been animated by all these sparks that were activated by the fact that I did it with real kavanah and real for kedusha. Umama od samachti. Here, this goes back to what someone else pointed out before. I think Mama od samachti biroti achar kach beferush eitz Yosef b'midbar Rabba shemevish mimefurash achad sheDavid HaMelech hitapech lifnei Aron HaKodesh. I was so happy that I saw in the Eitz Yosef, which is on from Eitz that's in Ein Yaakov, but apparently it's also on b'midbar Rabba. That brought from someone, I don't remember who, that David HaMelech, when he was dancing by the Aron HaKodesh, also did somersaults. So that brings it back to this thing that it's like the fear of Heichal attacking David. He's, his Yetzer Hara saying, well, everyone's going to attack, everyone's going to make fun of you, you're going to look like an idiot, the same way that she criticized David. So that you see here, it's very clear that he had that in his mind as well. Okay, now he's going to tell us about all the things that he hoped to achieve that he didn't achieve, which is the most interesting part of the piece, because here he tells us what was he really trying to do here. Besides, why did he want to do this harif act, l'shem Hashem, and all of that? So he says, "Eshara miti atzmi." Maybe I was deceiving myself. This is a big topic in him. Rama'ut atzmit, self-deception, is a big topic in him. If you look in Bnei Machshava Tova, in the very beginning, in the rules to join the group. So one of the rules is you can't be a person who deceives yourself. And he brings later in the book that he learned from his father-in-law that a person who's deceitful can't even do tshuva because their tshuva is also fake. So it's a big topic for him to be honest with yourself. He says, maybe I wasn't being honest with myself. Who says that these somersaults really became so holy? Maybe I'm making up this whole story. Maybe it was just, I had this idea in my mind. I had this vision that this was a great thing to do, but maybe it didn't really mean anything. Ani orarti et atzmi. I kind of came up with this narrative that this is so special to do this, and I got myself all excited, and I did it. Who says that's real? And why am I doubting myself? because now I'm going to tell you that I didn't succeed in my spiritual goals. Ki halo, behold, ela ri'iyah asher kiviti la lo zachiti. The vision that I hope to achieve, I did not merit to achieve. That's already number one. I was hoping to have a vision. I was hoping to have Ruach HaKodesh, or Nevuah, okay? And he's very, very much of a visual mystic. And as almost all in his books, he doesn't talk a lot about hearing Hashem. He always talks about seeing Hashem, okay? As opposed to, if you look, for example, in a little bit later, Rav Kook is all about seeing, right? Right, even cooking is like, in Yiddish, his eyes. And his initial spell, Ri'iyah, vision, and all of his books are Orot HaKodesh, and Orot HaTchiyah, and Orot HaTorah, and Orot. It's all about seeing lights, as opposed to his Talmud, the Rava Nazir. What's his book called? Kol HaNivu'ah, HaHigayon HaShim'i HaYisraeli, the voice of prophecy, the auditory logic of Judaism or something like that. His was all about hearing. Okay, it's very, very interesting. Okay, so he says, so I was hoping, apparently he was expecting to have a prophetic vision, but that didn't happen. Varuach asher kimat hayiti batuach bo sheyitgalel li bota sha'a lo nitgala. The spirit that I thought would be revealed to me at that moment, I was almost sure that would be revealed to me, was not revealed. It's another aspect maybe of Ruach HaKodesh or something like that. So I wanted to have some kind of prophetic experience. It didn't happen. So maybe that means that the whole thing was a fake. I just tricked myself. Aval chas v'shalom lachshov ke. No, that's the Yetzer Hara again. Stop bothering me. Don't think that. Gam ze pitui ha-Yetzer Hara hu lihistapek v'lachpor b'mesh ro'im u'margishim b'kodesh. That's also an temptation of the Yetzer Hara to be doubtful. Remember, we talked about the koach hamivaker that he mentions elsewhere. To be doubtful and to disagree with and to refute and to reject that which you felt was holy. Kiheach yichol achai lachish ad asher ba'alil b'kirbo chai. Play on words in the Gemara in Brachos about Rabbi Yeshua answering Rabbi Gamliel. Eichachai yichol lachish lachai. Right, so how can I deny that which I clearly felt within me? Haim kol shasha nitkarva el achinuch lo hirgashti et or shchinato yitbarach. Isn't it true that the whole time that we're building up to this tekes, this ceremony of chinuch sefer Torah, that I felt, but again, for him, regesh is the most important thing. For him, if you have to pick one word of what is Hasidus, it's regesh, it's emotion. That didn't I feel the light of the Shechina? Okay, now these next words, the next few lines are very tricky, okay, and very powerful. Hirgashti, lo hirgashti et or Shechinato yitbarach ve'et zihirat kavodo asher Timalei et mochi libi ume'ai yoter. Now I'll just read to the end. Haim lo bishvil zeh hichlati l'ranein et adon olam ki amarti ve'et asher ha'anochiyut shali yitmotet vatzmotai yitporer u'lenitzotz miziv HaKadosh Yisrael asher yimla'eni yitchalef Gam lakol ha'olam miziv kodsho yizrom v'nitzotz mi'oro ya'ir. This is amazing 4 lines. That is, to unpack it there's a lot going on here. So he says, didn't I feel the light of the Shekhinah and the splendor of Hashem's kavod filling me up? Okay? When we talk about ichud mystical union, so sometimes the way the Makubal writes or describes the experience, he is like the feminine, the Mikabel, who is receiving hashpa'ah, who's being filled up by hashpa'ah coming from the outside. Sometimes the Makubal writes about having a yichud with the Shekhinah, in which case he's the mashpia, and he enters into the Shekhinah to be mashpia, and the Shekhinah is the mekabelet. So what's going on here? First, he says, I felt that the kavod of Hashem would fill me, and it would fill my mochi, libi, v'me'ai. So that's again, intellect, emotion, and body, like every aspect of me, yoter. V'imlo bishvil zeh yichati l'ranein adon olam. In that feeling, I sang adon olam. I mean, we always, adon olam for us is like, the last thing when you're already out of shul, like, people adon olam, or before you got to shul, someone maybe said it, right? But he, in terms of, chashuv song, right? Okay. Ki amarti, because I said to him, why did I sing adon olam, the master of the whole universe? Because I said, at the time when my ego identity will completely dissolve or collapse, and my personal essence will dissolve, there's will be complete effacement of personality within the yichud with Hashem. He will no longer exist as a separate identity. Then a spark of the holiness of Hashem will fill me. So he's still, right now, he's basically now being malchut, being filled up al hashpa, coming from the highest throughout through Yesod into him, that he's receiving it and it's filling him. Then yitchalef, it will pass through me. He's now become Yesod, and all this energy is going through him. He's the conduit for the shefa, and it will go through me. Gam lekol ha'olam yiziv kodsho yizrom. All of the shefa from Hashem, all the ziv kadosh of Hashem will flow through me now that I've switched from being the passive feminine malchut to the active masculine mashpia yesod, and it will flow through me into the rest of the world. V'nitzotz mioro ya'ir, and his light will shine in the whole world, and that, folks, I believe, will bring the geula shlema. What we're seeing here is a desire for nevuah and an attempt to reach a complete, total state of dvekut with Hashem, to the extent that he becomes the conduit through which the shefa of Hashem flows into the entire world and transforms everything. But that happens when his personality, ego, identity is 100% dissolved. He no longer exists. And then he acts as initially a passive and then an active participant in this project. And he's very, very messianic. I mean, he takes the Baal Shem Tov's conversation with the Mashiach very, very, very seriously. That's why he feels that we need to revive Chassidut along the lines of the Baal Shem Tov. If we don't do that, we're being ma'akev the geula, mamash. Because Chassidut is the last final way of preparing the consciousness of the world to be able to be ready for Mashiach. Okay? So I think that's what he's wants to happen here. He says, and now he sums it all up, and going back to the theme that he wrote at the very beginning, he says, Ken, elasher kiviti v'kimat haiti batuach lo zachiti. That which I wanted and I was almost sure I would achieve, I didn't have the merit. Betach et atzmi ani makir. I took myself too seriously. Don't really know my low level. Right? Low level, like someone to even think like this, right? Va'ad kama shiodea ani et arkin hanamuch, od gasut haruach bi. I'm on a low level. I'm still not purified enough to do this. Vel harbe yoter min matzavi kiviti. I was hoping for something that was really beyond my kalim. Aval et asher hirgashti, but I know what I felt. V'gam et asher yibadeh hapachot miYisrael lasot l'Shem l'sha'a mitkadesh, and even that which the lowest Jewish person makes up, some totally personal thing to do, l'Shem Hashem, becomes holy. Okay. So what remains for us is to talk about, for a few minutes, what happens in the lacuna, in the ellipse where he doesn't say anything. He told us all about thinking about getting ready to do these somersaults, all this, maybe I shouldn't, no, it's hard, and then he tells us all this amazing reflection afterwards, including revealing all of his very, very amazing spiritual aspirations that he feels he didn't succeed in achieving. What happened at that moment? So I'm going to give you a theory, which might not be right, and there are probably a lot of other ways to look at this.
This is from your Rebbetzin, or this is yours?
Yeah, no, she gave me the idea. Like, she had studied this theory. It's called syncope. People know that word?
Syncope?
Yeah.
Yeah, to pass out.
Well, that's one manifestation. It basically means a missed moment in time. It has many, many manifestations. I think hiccuping is one. Fainting is certainly one. And there's it's discussed a lot. There's a woman named there was a psychoanalyst philosopher in France, Jacques Lacan. So he had a student named Rav Shagar brings him a lot in his later works. He had a student named Catherine Clement, and she wrote a book called Syncope in French. It's translated into English, and she analyzes many, many aspects of this. It's very foundational idea in music. When you're writing, which I don't know anything about, but when you're writing music scores, so there's the point where there's a stop is extremely significant, or how long the stop is, whatever. She says in the movies, whenever a woman faints, and she comes, it's always a woman, then she comes and she says, where am I? So she says, that's the wrong question. She should have asked, where was I? Like, where were you during those 10 seconds when you blacked out? I mean, today we have all these NDEs that everyone talks about. So we hear all these amazing things about where people are when we think they're in the hospital, just in a coma or whatever. I'm actually glad he's leaving. I'm actually glad he's leaving because one of the big topics in this book is syncope is about sex. So if, I don't know, whatever. So, okay, now first of all, there's a famous thing in William James in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, talks about one of the characteristics of a mystical experience is its ineffability. It's hard to talk about it. Like, it's hard to describe, although Jewish mystics do talk a lot about their mystical experiences. Okay, so what Clement talks about in her book, which is really a fascinating book, she talks a lot about different kinds of syncope experiences. A lot of them she gives a lot of descriptions of religious ecstasy experiences. Yeah, it's a missed moment. Let's say, for example, a missed period of time. Like a person faints,
right,
and then they come to. So where were they? What was happening during that moment? Okay. Or even if you sneeze for that split second, your eyes close and you don't really. Yeah.
I always throw out the sports analogy, but there's always a lot of times players when they make a great play, they're just in the zone, I don't know
anything about that, but she talks a lot about artists when they're creating, or also in a.
But that's not a miss moment. They're even more.
It's a different
engaged.
Yes and no. That's an interesting interplay because, for example, there's a really interesting scholar of Kabbalah and Islamic mysticism named Paul Fenton. He was at the Sorbonne. He made Aliyah. He's retired. He's pretty old, and he has a whole article about the mystical technique, which is already found in the Gemara and in the Heichal literature of putting your head between your knees, like Elazar ben Dardai in that story, and that's a way. And he brings a lot of examples, and both already from of Hai Gaon and others, and that's done in most of the descriptions of it to increase one's concentration. That's, I think, the opposite of what's going on here. What's going on here is not the attempt to increase concentration, which is what the Piaseczner is usually about. Here, I think, what's happening is he's trying to let go of concentration, to let go of consciousness. That you can't, there's a Gemara that says that one of the things that come with Behesach Hadat, there's scorpions and Mashiach and Avedot, right? Finding and Metzias. Right? So Mashiach coming back Hadat, no one will know this, and the Mashiach is there. So my Rebbe, the Kamana Rebbe, told me that once said, I thought he said in the name of the first Kamana Rebbe, the Rebbe Yitzchak Isaac, but later I talked to him. He said, I don't think so. I think I made it up. Was that it means the Mashiach will come back Hadat. He won't know that he's coming as Mashiach until it happens, until he finds out. But in any event.
Like
what happens, okay, in these things, and if you take the other example that she talks a lot about besides religious ecstasy, there's a lot of comparison in Christian mystics and Hindu mystics also with sexual ecstasy and orgasm, where basically there's a time of blackout, okay? There's also a time, there's like gender effacement, like there's a Beis Yaakov that says that something like at the time of the zivug, there's no longer, you can't tell what's the mashpia and who's mashpia and who's mekabel, because everything becomes one, right? So I think that's also happening here. There's a Mea Shiloach that talks, I think about it, talks about Erva Onan, that says that Hashem made it so that people would have to black out and forget about Hashem, or they wouldn't be able to conceive children. But there has to be a split second that you're not thinking about Hashem. You're not thinking about anything. You're gone for a split second. Okay. There is actually a counter story. There's a story about the Rizhiner said that the reason that his mother said, it's a crazy story, that his mother said that the reason, because they said about the Rizhiner that he didn't learn so much because he never forgot the Torah that he learned in the womb. So his mother said, Nehemiah Poem brings this in a beautiful article. She said, the reason that he never forgot the Torah that he learned in the womb is because at the moment he was conceived, my husband and I were 100% thinking about Hashem. But that's the opposite of this. And what's going on here is this moment of that there's a total collapse of identity. There's a very strong fluidity between masculine and feminine, mashpia, mikabel. One doesn't necessarily remember what happened. Okay, like here he knows. I think he may not remember what happened at the moment of the somersaults. That he was not there. He was blacked out. He was somewhere else. And one of the things she describes that's so interesting in terms of this is that after a syncope experience, and she talks also in terms of artists who are doing art kind of in a trance, is that afterwards there's always very often a feeling of some kind of a letdown, which is like Ritzel V'Shov, Yerida, right? That after the great Aliyah, after a peak religious, spiritual experience, right, or intimate experience, or whatever, then right away there's this feeling of let down, and then you start thinking about it again. Like, I want to, when can I do that again? How can I do that again? How could I achieve that again, whatever the context might be? So the way that he describes all this sort of melancholy, the way that he writes the second half of this piece of looking back and thinking about it, and is very similar to the way that she described that as well. Now, Aviva Zornberg has a piece in her book on Shemot where she uses this idea of syncope. I think my wife heard about it from Aviva Zornberg. She was learning with her at the time, and we were talking about the somersaults, and my wife said, I think maybe it could be related to the syncope. You should check this out. Also the Geulah from Mitzrayim, which was bedilugim. The dilugim is also kind of like, it's not a straight path. It has to happen with these like abrupt start and stop, kind of breaks and things like that. So there are presumably other types of religious, social, psychological studies you could look at this piece through besides syncope. I didn't find other syncope type things in the Piasetzner's writings. Usually it's very much about, strengthening your awareness, right? Very, very much so. I think it's very unusual in this sense. And I also, you'd have to maybe be ready to look in other Hasidic sources for this kind of thing. I didn't find anything so far, but that to me seems to be the strongest, the way that makes the most sense of it. So it's not an act like putting your head between your knees, which is, in most of the sources that are brought for that, is clearly about concentrating more intensely, although there's one source that Paul Fenton brings where it's, I forget who, maybe even Siach or something, where it's clearly also seems about losing your consciousness. But I think that what's happening here is that seems to me, was striving to do an act where he would lose his consciousness and flip, and then everything would change. And this again goes back to also maybe like we talk about the Piaseczner Rebbe that would do somersault. Oh, and by the way, I should also point out, I forgot to say, one of his close Hasidim of Netano Radzinu, who was a kid in Piaseczner, he said that when Jewish kids would come to the Rebbe, they were being drafted into the Polish army, so he'd have them do somersaults. Same idea to flip the mazel, okay? And Paul Fenton told me that he was at Hakafot of the Koidener Rebbe in Tel Aviv, and they were also doing somersaults. And they would yell Bitul Hayesh, and they would do somersaults. But
They do it at the end of in Simchas Torah in most Chabad shows.
Well, that's why in Tekoa and all the minyanim of Rosh Steinsaltz, they would all do it after at the end of Ne'ilah, also after Yom Kippur. But whatever, that's more or less what I have to say on this. It could be that my theories are not, they're very speculative, but I think in terms of the words we have a shot, and it's pretty, extremely amazing piece. Is that? Questions, answers, comments, alternate theories?
Maybe it just wasn't a somersault. I mean, maybe it was the way we're imagining.
Right.
Maybe it was some breakdancing move, whatever it is. Say some aspect of a dance that was more than a regular.
But
dance
he did say I could dance wildly, but that's not good enough. It has to be
right. So
I don't know if it really matters so much.
Right. I mean,
When you do somersault, though, you do kind of. Because I do
that's
somersault.
like blacking out.
There is that split second.
There's a moment, disorientation.
Which aligns very well with what he was saying of becoming them from the makabel to the mashpia, that filling up, because if your head goes down, your brain, anatomically, physiologically, you're a doctor, so please, but all the blood goes to your head, and then when you come back up, then it all drains, which is a vasovagal syncope. It's when the vagus nerve can't support the blood flow to the brain. So what happens? You pass out, you lay flat, so then the blood goes back to your brain. So.
Yeah, and one of the ways of trying to fight that is putting your hands between your knees.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Or ankle pumps. PT.
Okay.
Just at the end, where you're like, this is just one more tzaddik in the generations trying to bring Mashiach and not being successful. It doesn't again, it's not like a letdown necessarily of I didn't do what I was supposed to do. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, but it wasn't the time right at that moment.
Yeah. Sort of possible. I think
also speculation.
Yeah. He held himself to extraordinarily high standards, as you see throughout.
Again, a person doing, the shtick at the wedding isn't usually have a journal entry afterwards.
Right.
Here's what I thought before,
Sure.
leading up to the moment when I started juggling.
Absolutely.
And then I kicked the collar.
Right. He's,
I have one myself.
he's.
It wasn't the collar, but I got someone else pretty good.
The interesting to me was that I never really heard of having nitzotos. Normally, you always think of you want to collect nitzotos outside. You're doing something with collecting them, not that.
It's very, very interesting, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I'm aware of other parallel passages like that come to
What
mind.
he said is that he had this buildup of nitzotos where it's that you're putting all the time and the effort, and it has to culminate with something. And this is the time where all that came into action.
Well, in food, you for sure. No, that's what I'm saying. Everything is external, and our vote in life is the elevated food.
In food, you imbibe the nitzotos.
But the bracha and the kavana, you're elevating nitzotos. It's an external act again. He was saying he has nitzotos within himself that he felt he has to actualize. I never.
Yeah, it's.
I'm reading Reb Palm's autobiography, and then actually then Hanei Menachem is unbelievable, his autobiography. Oh my gosh! But Reb Palm, in his simplicity of being a tzaddik, he was like, he went to a dentist, and he told the dentist, oh my gosh, you're so lucky you chesed all day. The dentist said, what do you mean I make a parnasa? He never had the machshava. Then he just elevated, his life was changed, because now, right, instead of just being a mechanic all day, so he elevated to a holy act all day.
You know how everybody would go to the dentist? He'd go to the dentist and he'd say, "Don't give me any Novocaine or anything like that. Just give me 3 seconds," and like go into like a learning
That's
trance. He says, "Okay,
right.
but do whatever you want, and won't feel
Right.
anything."
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. Tov, Yasher Koch, thank you so much.